During the Holocaust, over 11 million people lost their lives. A large portion of these deaths were due to medical experiments. There were many experiments performed during the Holocaust, but a few of the most known were twin experiments, hypothermia experiments, and high altitude experiments. All these experiments were performed for the benefit of the German military. They were meant to help the military gain knowledge. Joseph Mengele is the infamous doctor of Auschwitz. He is also known as the Angel of Death, and he led most of the experiments that took place. Eventually, he was charged with crimes such as selections, lethal injections, shootings, beatings, and other forms of deliberate killing. However, Mengele escaped after the war. He moved to several different places, including Bavaria and Paraguay, and years later, it was discovered that he had died from a stroke while swimming. He had taken the identity of a man named Gerard. All of the research that was completed was purely done for the advancement of the German military. The United States Holocaust Museum explains that each experiment performed falls into one of three categories. These include research aimed at improving the survival and rescue of German troops, to test medical procedure and pharmaceuticals, and experiments to confirm Nazi racial ideology. The hypothermia experiments took place from August 1942 to May 1943. These experiments were conducted for the German Air Force to investigate the treatment of a soldier who had hypothermia. According to the Jewish Virtual Library, the subjects of one of the experiments had to remain in ice water for up to 3 hours. Many people died from this experiment, but the ones who survived were attempted to bring their temperature back to normal. In another experiment, subjects were forced to stay outdoors, with no clothing or protection from the below average temperatures. About 1,500 pairs of twins had been estimated to be in Auschwitz between 1943 and 1945. Only around 200 survived. In the book, When Medicine Went Mad, Eva Kor explains her testimony that twins in the experiment would be measured daily, and any similar features would be marked as hereditary, while the differences were marked as environmental. During the twin experiments, one of the twins died, the other would be killed so a double autopsy could be performed. One twin experiment included being kept in a small wooden cage, while the other was given painful injections. Furthermore, these high-altitude experiments were performed at Dachau concentration camp from March 1942 to August 1942. Their purpose was to test limits of human endurance at extremely high altitudes for the benefit of the German Air Force. Nova Online explains that the experiments took place in a low-pressure chamber that emulated the atmospheric conditions at high altitudes. Out of about 200 people who went through the high-altitude experiments, only about 80 survived. The survivors were executed. One of the survivors of the twin experiments was Eva Kor. She has dedicated herself to telling the horrors that she went through. Kor has spoken many times about her experiences in documentaries, on social media, and tours. In her memoir, Echoes of Auschwitz, the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center, which she and her sister helped found, has many of her experiences and testimonies, such as she and her family were deported to Auschwitz in 1944. Her and her sister Miriam were forced into Mengele's twin experiments. She recounts that they would take blood from one arm and inject into the other. After one of these many injections, she became very ill. Once she recovered, they continued to experiment on her. Miriam suffered long-term effects from the experiments. Her kidneys stopped growing and remained the size of a child's for the rest of her life. The Holocaust left effects on all survivors, both physically and mentally. Some who were so young when it started came out knowing nothing but the camps. But survivors of medical experiments were affected in much different ways, as you can see. Many had permanent changes to their health, and their experiences from the experiments haunted them for the rest of their lives.